What's up? What's up? What's up, world? It's your boy KJ Bradley and my favorite chaplain in the world, Mr. Chaplain O'Neal. We are two POGS here to save the world, and today we got a very, very special guest, the esteemed Mr. Gregg Easterbrook, author, journalist extraordinaire. His resume is impeccable, over 30 years in the game, and he's been doing it for a very long time. We don't have a lot of time. We got about an hour, so this is going to be quick hit, rapid fire today, guys. How you doing, Mr. Easterbrook?
I'm great, KJ. Nice to talk to you.
Indeed. Chappie, how you doing, sir?
I'm great. This is awesome. I've been looking forward to this.
Indeed. So if you guys don't mind, man, we're going to jump right into it. First thing I want to talk about is your 1995 project, A Moment on the Earth, right? So in the book, you kind of talked about how, with the exception of, I think it was the gases, we're pretty in, we were set up in 95 for a, I guess I'll use the word environmental optimism. Here we are 30 plus, close to 30 years later. What are your thoughts on that? How do you feel? How do you feel now looking back at it 30 years later?
Well, when this book, A Moment on the Earth, came out in 1995, at that time, the mood about the environment was extremely negative on just about everything. Smog, acid rain, species extinction. It was all thought to be overwhelmingly bad. And people were just becoming aware of climate change as the ultimate bad problem. And that book said, actually, all trends are positive in environmental issues, except for greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are increasing. And in 1995, it was not yet proven that the human action causes an effect on climate. So that book said, everything's getting better except for greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases, we need more research. Hugely controversial. People like for the narrative to be negative. For some reason that's really hard to grasp, maybe it goes back to the book of Revelation. People want to believe that the world is about to end. And when I come along with an 800-page book, and I got to say, I learned my lesson. I've never, now my books are only 700 pages, but I come along with an 800-page book full of facts and research saying that actually almost everything is getting better. To my surprise, the fact that I said that things were getting better made people angry. If the book had said the world is ending, the Rockefeller Foundation would have put its arms around me and said, "Oh, come on in, we love you. You think the world is ending." And instead I say, "No, I think things are getting better." And that made people angry. And that is ongoing in American public discourse. If you think that everything is unbelievably bad, the country's falling apart, it's never been worse, oh, my grandparents had it so much better than I do. If you think that, you're trendy, and most importantly in the writing world that I'm familiar with, you get funded if you think that. Foundations support you, publishers buy your books. If you say, as I've now said in 3 books, including a book called It's Better Than It Looks in 2018, saying that most things are getting better for most people most of the time. And of course, there are problems, but most things are getting better, and we can expect this to continue into the future. People don't like that. You mentioned awards, KJ, and I'm glad to say I've got a bunch. The thing that I am most proud of in life is that in 2017, I was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is a pretty huge thrill. And I've since talked to the members of the committee, all pretty well-known people. You'd know if I mentioned their names, about why they chose me. And they said, "Well, we love your writing everybody knows your writing is fabulous. Everybody knows you're also a good journalist. You do original reporting. The one thing we were uncomfortable with was your optimism." And somehow they were able to get over that. But that's been a recurring theme in my professional life. I went back and actually read those 800 pages of A Moment on the Earth about a year ago. And there's a couple of words I would change, but it's all stood up pretty well. And then 9 years later, in 2006, the National Academy of Sciences concluded that greenhouse emissions do in fact impact Earth's climate. So ever since then, I've said I believe that, and that I favor greenhouse gas restrictions.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Chappie, you got anything?
No, that was one of the first things I early on. I'd read some of the different things that Gregg had written on Tuesday Morning Quarterback on ESPN, and some of the different things. And I went back and I found an old YouTube. This was years ago that he had spoken at BYU, and as everybody knows, I'm LDS and a big BYU fan. And I watched that just going, this guy gets it, because Gregg was talking about how everybody sees everything is so negative, but at the same time, we're the most peaceful time in the history of the world. If you look at how wars happen, even health and the death of plagues aren't really going anymore. And we've done so much to advance, but my goodness, everything has to be horrible. And since then, I've followed it, almost everything you've written, especially online, just going, yep, this guy gets it. Smart. KJ knows when I walk in a room, I generally think I'm the smartest person in the room. And right now, I don't feel like that. That's why I'm smiling so much. I just love to hear somebody who I really respect and feel like understands, the world and the paradigm, how it should be, versus how the media's paradigm puts everything out as if it bleeds, it leads, instead of, hey, we're actually in a good place. We're doing really well. People will say, well, what about Ukraine and Russia, or what about Israel and Hamas? And those are tiny little nothing wars right now comparative to the numbers that were dying in Vietnam or World War I, World War II, the 100 years where you go back. These are blips comparatively. And instead, because we have 24-hour media, it just goes on and on and on about rocket launches into Israel, which are horrible, but one person dies, not thousands of people die from rocket launches. But the media will focus on that one person who dies, as bad as it is, instead of going, let's look at this. And yes, we need to improve and make things better, but let's look at this in comparison. And I think we miss that.
Oh, absolutely. Ukraine, Gaza, and Israel are terrible exceptions, and they are terrible, to the overall rule of things getting better. Right now, your chance of anyone on our planet, any country, your chance of dying by violence, criminal violence or combat violence, is the lowest that it's been in human history. And probably next year it will be even lower still. And that's with the population of the world rising. In the past, we think whenever population increases, it causes tensions between groups and nations and leads to violence. We've seen in the last 50 years, the biggest population increase ever has led to steadily declining violence. And I think it's a sign of several things. It's a sign of how our economies operate. It's a sign of improving moral structure. We've got a long way to go in terms of moral structure, but the moral awareness in the world gets better every year, not worse. And your risk of death through violence is the lowest it's ever been. Your risk of death from not all, but most diseases, rates of most diseases are declining, including cancer and heart disease. Your risk of exposure to dangerous pollution is declining in almost every part of the world, not every single part. The east coast of China is still a pretty bad place to try to breathe. But most of the world, the air and water are getting cleaner. Most things, I've given a lot of thought to the right way to phrase this. And I concluded in the book, It's Better Than It Looks, that the statement that works is most things are getting better for most people, and this can be expected to continue. I think that unfolds awareness of the fact that there's all kinds of problems, all kinds of individual and regional problems, and there are probably more problems that we don't even know about yet coming. But most things are getting better for most people, and we can expect this to continue. That's it. It just hits you on the head when you realize the mainstream media doesn't like that thought. The Ivy League doesn't like that thought. The financial elites of the United States don't like that thought. They want to believe that everything's an emergency, and what does the emergency justify? It justifies more power for them, and that's how I think that issue's gotten twisted out of control.
Yeah, KJ and I have talked about this as well. I don't trust most federal politicians, and even down, but federal politicians don't want to solve problems, because if they solve problems, they'll have less power.
Then you
so
leave,
as long as everything's
bad.
Yeah. Well, with climate change, and let me ask you this, because I personally believe that climate change, from what I've seen and read, is affected more by some of the natural things. And I respect the view of greenhouse gases. I'm not fully on board, but that said, with greenhouse gases, I think we run into the same thing, as people are freaked out because of how the media covers it. When they say, even if we eliminated, I've seen articles that say, even if we eliminated all cars and all factories today, they just went mute or disappeared, it wouldn't affect the outcome of how the world goes up. The temperature goes up for over 100 years. And when I ask people about, well, what's the solution? They say, well, we need to go to wind farms and we need to go to solar. And I say, well, what about nuclear? And they say, oh, well, no, nuclear is no good. I said, then you're not a serious person.
Right.
If we're talking about changing the world and really making this a better place, nuclear needs to be the place to start. What do you think about some of those things?
Well, society has very irrational views of nuclear power, not nuclear weapons, which are terrible. But it's not just the United States. Most of Western Europe, prominently Germany, has very irrational views of nuclear power. If you're serious about fighting greenhouse gases over the long term, nuclear has got to be part of it. Wind and solar are nice in some places, but they can't generate anywhere near enough electricity to solve the baseline problem. And they only work in some places, and they only work when the weather is favorable. You need baseline power, and that's what nuclear power is good at. And the risk is not zero, but it's really small. It's really small compared to other ways of generating energy. And you will find that if you go, there's kind of the middle of this issue. There's the right, the deniers who say global warming is a hoax, which is not. It's very real. If you go all the way to the far left of this debate, you find people who support nuclear power. The main example is James Hansen, the retired NASA researcher, who was the first guy to sound the modern warning on greenhouse gases in the late 1980s. And is as far left on this debate as you can possibly get. He's a big advocate of nuclear power because he's looked at the numbers and he said, if you want to solve this problem, instead of just waving your hands in the air about it, we need to build a lot of nuclear reactors and stop using coal and natural gas.
Yeah, one of the things I've said, because when we have our discussions, we try to come up with solutions. And one of the things I've said is what we should I think the federal government should do is put out a $10 billion reward and 5 licenses that they can build or sell nuclear power plants, and say, all right, whoever comes up with a solution to the nuclear waste problem, how do we actually deal with nuclear waste in an effective, safe way? Here's 10 billion and 5 licenses that are probably each worth $500 million that you can sell to another utility or whatever. But let's have the R&D dollars go into it. BP, Exxon, all of them would jump on board going, hey, we need to get some R&D going on this.
Well, what the government is subsidizing in that way is solar and wind. The misnamed Inflation Reduction Act of 2 years ago contains $380 billion for solar and wind. And there's nothing wrong with solar and wind in the right circumstances. It's good, and its greenhouse emissions are not zero, but they're a lot lower than any fossil fuel. But the energy density numbers on wind and solar are really depressing. You have to spend a huge amount of capital to get a small amount of electricity. You could get much better effect with nuclear, with building new natural gas-fired power plants, natural gas does involve some greenhouse emissions, but it's a lot lower than other fossil forms, and that's a way to get society through this transitional period of the next few decades while we're working on ultimate solutions. But the thing that the federal government is subsidizing is wind and solar, because it makes the left wing of the Democratic Party happy. Almost all that money is wind and solar will raise electricity rates, costing average people money. Almost all the $380 billion in subsidies is going to go to the Silicon Valley elites, not to average people. The debate is very skewed. And I'll emphasize, I think there's nothing wrong with wind and solar. In some places, they're a good option, but they don't solve the underlying greenhouse equation. You need nuclear to do that.
It's great. As we get ready to move forward, I kind of wanted to pick your brain, Mr. Easterbrook, on what do you think the single most important moment in American history is?
Well, I'm going to give you the date that the United States was born, our birthday. And your listeners may think, well, everybody knows it's July 4th, 1776. I'm going to say, no, it's not. I'm going to say America's birthday was June 21st, 1788. That was the day the United States Constitution was ratified. And if you think about 1776, very important, it was a declaration of independence from a colonizer. We had to break away from a colonizer, just like a lot of peoples are trying to do. But it didn't create a country. And it was far from certain, even after the the Revolutionary War against Great Britain was won, it was far from certain that a country would be a result. Many of the founders feared that each individual, now we call them states, then they were called colonies, would declare itself sovereign. We'd have the nation of Pennsylvania, the nation of South Carolina, and that they'd start forming coalitions and going to war against each other, because that had been the pattern in Europe for 500 years before American independence. Lots of little countries constantly forming coalitions and going to war with each other. And the founders wisely knew that we needed one single unified nation to prevent that from happening. And with the terrible exception of the Civil War, it did prevent that from happening for more than 200 years. We haven't had coalition warfare on this continent. That's only happened once. So the Constitution proposed and then ratified in June 21, 1788, when actually took effect a few months later. But the day the Constitution was ratified, and ratified unanimously, meaning everybody was on board, that was the day that we knew we'd have a country. And that Constitution is the greatest Constitution in the world. Yes, of course it has faults. Everybody knows a lot of obvious faults. It's been amended 27 times, and it could use a few more amendments. But a structure of government that's lasted almost 2.5 centuries, with only a few little tweaks to the exact choice of words, that's a pretty wise document.
It's awesome. I got to pick your brain, because Chappie and I discussed this quite a few episodes ago. If you could propose one amendment to the Constitution, what would it be?
I would. My temptation is to fudge that question by saying, well, I'd want a grab bag amendment that changed a bunch of things. But if I could change just one thing, I would eliminate the Electoral College and go to direct election of the president. America's a democracy. We're trying to convince the rest of the world to be democracies, and yet we don't have direct election of our president. Remember that the Senate members of the Senate used to be appointed. I'm trying to remember, 21st Amendment, about 100 years ago, there was an amendment going to direct election to the Senate. And it's worked just fine. Yeah, some senators are windbags, but they're chosen by the people. The president of the United States should be chosen by the people, not by this antiquated mechanism that has some relationship to how people vote, but not that much. So we need to get rid of it. That would be the one change that I would put at the top.
That is an awesome change. Chappie, your thoughts?
My amendment was the 28th Amendment would be Congress shall pass no law from which they themselves are exempt.
I like that. I'm all for that.
All right.
KJ, what was yours?
I cannot recall, to be honest with you. I was trying, but I was just like, when Mr. Easterbrook said his amendment, I was like, yeah, all right, cool. That's it. Like that's the end of it. I'm okay with that. We can let that rock. Pushing the ball forward. All right. So this is near and dear to my heart. Many moons ago, I started out my college studies in journalism. I know Chappie as well started out his studies in journalism, and we pivoted to a military career. But you pushed all the way through. So I kind of want your thoughts about the good and bad of writing over the years and in today's culture, especially. And then what do you think the future of journalism is? Well,
I think a pretty good consensus that journalism specifically, and generally communication, book publishing, everything that has to do with communication, the industry is in chaos right now. But spoiler alert, those industries have always been in chaos. You can go back to Gutenberg inventing the movable type, and it threw the publishing industry of that time, 600 years ago, into chaos. That communication is fundamentally a chaotic pursuit, because people's society changes, people's tastes change, people's ability to desire, really is a better word, to comprehend issues changes. The physical technology, how books were printed. 100 years ago, popular radio, the average person having a radio and being able to listen to radio shows was a revolutionary change. Phonograph records were going to destroy the music industry. Everything that comes along that's technological is going to, it disrupts what already exists. And 20 years ago, 25, really, the web coming along, everybody thought, oh my God, newspapers are going to go out of business. They're going to go out of business. Well, they're bigger and more profitable than they've ever been. And now newspapers are encouraging you to read them on your phone rather than have a printed paper delivered, because they've realized that they're a lot more profitable if you read on the phone than if some guy has to bring the paper to your front porch and throw it. And I'm sure that there's some disruptive change coming that none of the three of us can anticipate. It's just journalism is chaotic. But I can tell this, especially to any young person listening to this podcast. When I was getting started, at first as a journalist and then as a book author, and being a book author was my ultimate objective, and I'm glad to say I achieved it. People said to me, don't go into writing. There's no future in that business. Don't go into writing. You'll never make a living. And I've done okay. And I hear people now saying, don't go into writing. You'll never make a living. And there's a lot of things that could go wrong, but if it's what you want to do, probably it will work out. I can tell you that certain parts of journalism, especially the serious policy journalism, like one finds in the Atlantic and the New Yorker, and the Atlantic is my first love in the writing business. I was on their masthead for a long time. Love that magazine, still do. If you convert to current dollars, it pays about a quarter of what it paid when I was starting off in journalism. So some types of journalism pay a lot less. And if you think about the op-ed page of the New York Times, that's one of the most influential forums in the country. When I was starting off in journalism, and again, you inflate to current dollars, the first op-ed piece I wrote for the New York Times in today's money paid $3,000. The most recent op-ed piece I wrote for the New York Times paid $200. So the serious public policy part of journalism pay has gone way down. But on the other hand, you can make money on the web, which you couldn't before. I now have a Substack, which I'm hoping you guys will push. Substacks didn't even exist a few years ago. And I'm pleased to say I'm doing real well on my Substack, and I'm not the only one. There are hundreds of serious writers who are doing real well on Substack. And there may be something else coming along that will be even better than that. So that's my perspective.
So I've not always, but I've kind of worried. You go back through history and you look at certain professions such as the acting profession, theater, journalism, that lean much harder left. And I've never been able to really figure out why that occurs. Now, I think in drama, because you're trying to put yourself into somebody else's shoes, maybe there's some more empathy and there's more ideas of that more liberal, left-leaning, let's say. And in journalism, I've never really understood that, because journalism, you would think, for the most part, should be pretty center of the mill, because you should be covering the 5 W's. Now, the Y is where we get into the left or right. But I'm curious, because I've heard, you always hear people say, well, Fox News is just a wing of the Republican Party. I go, well, okay, let's say they are. That's fine when you have one Fox News, but on the left you have ABC, NBC, CBS, the New York Times op-ed, the Washington Post, the MSNBC, CNN, all these. So if you want to say Fox News is right, okay, cool, fine. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts that, because I see you, and when I read you, one of the things I really appreciate is that I don't necessarily get a feel for your politics per se. I have pieced some things together, but never once have I thought, wow, that Gregg, he's far left. When you wrote a few weeks ago about the governor of Rhode Island and Nikki Haley, two politicians that you could see moving forward, being very positive for this country, I read that and went, whoa, who's this person in Rhode Island? Because I left the Republican Party when Trump was nominated. But I could never vote for, I always laugh when people go, oh, you left the Republican Party, then you should vote for Biden. It's like, I'm a conservative, not, I'm not voting for a leftist or somebody who leans hard left. I'll take the lesser of two evils. But what is it about journalism that drive that more people or that of sociology? What drives certain political viewpoints towards certain professionalism. What's your thoughts on
Well,
that?
let me give you my theory on that. And first, say maybe you already know this, Jabby. The famous line from Ronald Reagan about the Democratic Party: "I didn't leave the Democratic Party; it left me."
It left me.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you can say the same thing about the Republican Party today. Um, in journalism, I would attribute this to most journalists being highly educated. And although in general, higher education is great, in fact, if you had to pick the single greatest thing about the United States, it may be that we have more great colleges and universities than the whole rest of the world combined. If you're going to found a country that could have either lots of petroleum or lots of great universities, you'd take great universities every day. But what do you learn at great universities? You learn to be snide and to look down on other people, especially at the Ivy League level of Ivy League, University of Chicago, Northwestern, etc. They're all great. But the way you impress the professor is by being sneering at things and saying, "Oh, that William Faulkner, he wasn't any good." And you look in the past and you say, "Grover Cleveland, he belonged in prison." Those are the kind of things you say to impress your professors in the Ivy League. And then when you end up writing for the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, you bring those same qualities with you, and to the reader, it sort of feels like leftism because you're always denouncing the establishment. But what you're really doing is trying to please your Ivy League professors by looking down on things.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you see, I'd be curious to see the journalism products coming out of something like you said, the Ivy League or Syracuse or Northwestern, versus say Arizona State, which is very well known for its journalism school.
It does, yes.
But I'd be curious to see if the people coming out of Arizona State are different, because Arizona State is not seen as a liberal bastion.
No, it's
certainly not like Stanford or Cal or the Ivy League. So that's curious. I might have to start looking and trying to find who came out of Arizona State.
Yeah, I don't know if you can prove this with statistics, but to the question you asked, that's my impression.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, it's almost like we're asking questions that you've recently written about in All Predictions Wrong.
Right.
I want to talk about, I know in the past you brought up the topic of radio burst and planetary weapons.
Right.
That was interesting commentary. Would you like to share your thoughts, and then we'll kind of ask some questions as you go along. I'm just
sure. Space, in addition to being inexpressibly huge, is full of mysteries, things that we know little or nothing about. And with the new space telescope, the Webb Space Telescope, with Euclid, another telescope going up into space, and 3 more big new advanced telescopes due within the next few years, I think we're going to find out more about the cosmos in the next generation than we've learned in all of human history so far. And there's a lot of really basic mysteries, not just how did it all start, how does it all work. We think the universe is more than 90% dark energy and dark matter, and yet we can't locate either one. We can't locate the universe. That's kind of a big question. But one of the other mysteries is gamma ray or fast radio bursts. When we look up into the sky, and we meaning astronomers, sometimes we see very brief, exceptionally strong energy events, much stronger than a supernova. And energy events that are thousands or even millions of times the energy that our sun emits on a routine basis. And it's hard to imagine what could possibly cause that. B, we used to think they were all very far away in distance and very far back in time. Now it turns out some of them are uncomfortably nearby. So what is it? So I started saying years ago, maybe we're observing the muzzle flashes of doomsday weapons of other societies. When we look out into the galaxy, another thing that strikes us is that we appear to be alone. If you go back 50 years, when radio astronomy first began in the early post-war era, in the late 50s, early 60s, astronomers assumed that as soon as we turned on radio telescopes, we were going to overhear thousands of space alien conversations, because the heavens would be full of other kinds of life. They'd all be older than us. They'd all be better developed. We were going to be able to hear them talking to each other. And so we didn't hear anything. And we've been listening ever since and never heard a peep from anywhere else in the galaxy. And it's not just radio, because maybe aliens don't use radio. All other kinds of transmission frequencies have been scanned. We've looked for signposts. Like coherent light doesn't occur in nature. We know how to make coherent light with lasers. So we don't see any coherent light anywhere in the galaxy. We don't, plutonium, we sadly know how to make plutonium. I wish we didn't. We know how to make it. It doesn't occur naturally. We don't see the emission lines of plutonium anywhere in the galaxy. It looks like, no, this could be wrong, but it looks like we're the only thinking species in the galaxy. So you think, well, the natural assumption of, natural is a bad pun, of scientists to say, well, anything that we observe in the cosmos must be a natural phenomenon. It can't be supernatural because there's no God. And we have to assume that it occurs naturally. So these fast radio bursts, there must be a natural explanation. What if they're weapons? What if the reasons that we don't see any civilization in the galaxy is that it's that weapons are easier to acquire than wisdom, and that there have been other civilizations and they've destroyed themselves. And when I hope you guys saw the movie Oppenheimer. It's a really good movie, well done. And it made me think, if there are other worlds, there's going to be other Oppenheimers. There are going to be other people or beings, whatever they are, who can figure out how to split the atom. And maybe they figured it out and their civilizations don't exist anymore. As we begin to look farther into the galaxy, and these two new telescopes already online and 3 more coming, if they show us other worlds that look like no one's ever lived there, or maybe have plant life, but they don't have any intelligent life, I would actually be a lot more comfortable finding that out than showing us a world with the ruins of a destroyed civilization. Because that would make us think, that's what our future is going to be.
I have to agree.
Well,
no, go ahead.
I think Carl Sagan's line of it's pretty arrogant to think out of the trillions and trillions of stars out there that we're the only life that's out there. And I just look at it and go, I think we haven't found it yet, simply because we can't. It's impossible I really truly believe it's impossible for the human mind to comprehend how big the known universe really is.
Yeah.
Like we could have what's going on with us in some form a billion times over, literally a billion times over, and still be a billion light, millions of light years away from each other, and just not passing each other. One of the things you also brought up was that other civilizations might not communicate through radio waves. You look at Orson Scott Card's the whole Ender series. He talks about, or in the book, the civilization that comes up, they are hive mind out of insectoid. So of course, when we go to battle with them, because we can't communicate, because they think these are a bunch of idiots who can't, these are ants to them. And so it's just so curious to me that we think that we understand anything really about the universe. It's crazy to me, because I look at it and I go, as much as we know, it's where the lack of wisdom, I think, comes in. Intelligence is the ability to learn something. Wisdom is when you learn something new, you open a door and realize how much is behind that you didn't know.
Yeah.
And I just think as a people, we are not very good on our wisdom scale.
No, the wisdom technology is actually going pretty well. Wisdom is not going that well. And my guess on this has always been that humanity knows 1% of what is possible to know. Almost everything is waiting to be discovered, and hopefully we'll be able to understand it. And the question of why the Milky Way seems empty, except for us, there are possible solutions that do not involve cataclysms. If life is created by God, then who can say what the divine agenda calls for? If life evolves naturally, it takes a long time. It took 4 billion years here. It could be taking a long time to evolve on other worlds as well. For all we know, we're the first. At some point, we will be the wise aliens wandering the galaxy. Excuse me, I have a cold, righting wrongs and showing others the way. Maybe we're the first. It could be that life takes so long to evolve, and then very quickly, in cosmic terms, acquires the ability either to destroy itself with atomic weapons, or to elevate to some higher plane of existence and disappear from our sight. This takes, and that takes a short time compared to cosmology. That the odds are, and the galaxy is so big, that it's just statistically unlikely that there would be two intelligent civilizations, both at their communicating and rocket launching phase at the same time in the same quadrant of the galaxy. And that's the silence of the galaxy. That's all it means. There's been civilizations before. There'll be civilizations again. There just isn't another one similar to us nearby right now. And if that's the explanation, I think we could all live with that too. I certainly don't want the explanation to be that civilizations destroy themselves, but it could be that they ascend to some higher plane of existence, either in a religious or purely material sense, some higher plane that's not obvious to us right now.
So then this is the thought that pops up with that then. What do we think about, what do we call UFOs now? UAPs or UAVs, yeah. Whatever the new phrase is. So what do you think about because I've said for a while, I will vote for anybody that says they'll release the entire JFK file, that'll release all the UFO information, and we'll get rid of daylight saving time. You give me those three things, I'll vote for you. But what do you think about the UFO and the government, what now looks like some form of a cover-up?
Right. It's so hard to imagine faster than light travel that you think any civilization that's able to overcome this technical barrier. Now, Isaac Newton couldn't have imagined the Boeing 747. So maybe there's a solution to interstellar distance that we don't know anything about. But any civilization that was able to overcome that barrier could easily conceal its ships from us. We wouldn't see them floating around because it never occurred to them that someone might say, hey, look at that saucer. So either flying saucers or something else, UFOs, or we're mistaking them for something else. And an aircraft that's far away is, if you look at aircraft in the distance, they look like saucers when they're far away. But any civilization that could overcome those obstacles could hide its arrival from us. Now, maybe they're testing us. Maybe they want to be seen and see how we respond. I suppose that's possible. It's also hard to imagine why a civilization that's able to overcome the barrier of interstellar travel, how we could possibly have anything they want. I mean, you know, in the movies, in science fiction movies, that aliens are always invading Earth to steal our water. And this is because science fiction movies are written by scriptwriters who live in Southern California where it's dry, and these scriptwriters are not exactly science majors. So they want to steal our water. Water is probably the single most common compound in the universe. You want water, it's everywhere, man, and far more than we have in our oceans. So try to imagine what we have that aliens could actually want. Now, maybe they're irrational. There are human societies that behave in irrational ways. So maybe the aliens are irrational. When I've thought of this, what would we have that aliens could actually want? My answer is the ineffable soul. Maybe aliens are religious and they want to convert people. Conversion must be given freely. They can't manufacture souls. They can't steal our souls. They have to convince us to join their religion. And it may be that alien scouts will arrive and start trying to figure out our culture so they can present their religion to us. But I don't think there's anything in the UFOlogy, and I've looked at some of it, that really feels clearly like the arrival of technology from another world. There's sightings you can't really explain, but they're always brief. They're never accompanied by secondary characteristics, just a brief flash of something that you can't really be sure what you saw. And of course, you can never get a picture of one. It's possible. You certainly can't rule it out. You certainly cannot rule out that aliens want to come here or have been here already or will figure out how to get here. But I don't think there's any confirmation that's actually occurred.
Yeah, I think one of the things that always kind of kept me pinging in the back of my mind is with our capabilities of stealth and being able to disguise our aircraft from our enemies when we're in their area. There's no way possible, you know, an advanced species would allow us, would let us see them unless they wanted us to.
Unless they wanted to, yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Like I couldn't fathom it. I did, before we move forward, I remember reading something about it, you had some thoughts on the space station and NASA back in the day. Not necessarily NASA itself in this program, but what was it? I think it was the space shuttle program. And then I just kind of wanted your thoughts on that, and how do you see the privatization of that of the space program going?
Well, first, let me say one more thing about aliens. If they're coming, there's also a possibility that they simply don't care if we see them. When I was younger, I used to scuba dive. I love scuba diving, and I didn't care if the fish saw me. They were obviously seeing it what was to them an advanced being with this technology that they can't comprehend. I didn't care if they saw me because I had no intention of trying to communicate with the fish. So anybody who's advanced enough to travel on an interstellar basis may not care if we see them because they don't plan to communicate with us. They don't care what we think. That's a possibility. I was a big critic of the space shuttle program because I thought the economics of it made no sense and the engineering of it made no sense. And I think the last 10 years when all nations have given up on shuttle-like vehicles and gone back to regular rockets, Elon Musk has done a good job of building partially reusable rockets, and his gigantic moon rocket-like thing that's now flown twice and blown up twice, it would, if he's able to perfect it, it would be reusable, and that would be a huge step forward. I just didn't think the space shuttle ever worked on an economic or engineering basis. It's impressive that it flew as often as it did, but the United States wasted a lot of time and money on that project. That's my short version.
No worries. That makes perfect sense. All right.
And Greg just wrote something this week about we had the rockets back in the 60s that could get us to the moon and everything. We just ignore that technology and go, let's just start over. I don't. Yeah, it's silly.
Elon Musk's rocket is blown. They've lit the fuse twice and it's blown up both times. The Saturn V moon rocket, which is very similar, though not identical, it was not reusable. Musk's rocket would be reusable, which is a big step forward if he can make it work. That rocket was launched 13 times and it worked perfectly all 13. It never blew up, it never malfunctioned. And that was half a century ago. Why are we having trouble doing today something that we did easily half a century ago? And NASA's similar giant rocket called the Artemis, which basically duplicates the old Saturn V. That's only flown once, and it's really a lot more expensive than the Saturn V was. And that's if you convert into current dollars.
Yep. That goes into, I think, especially as a country, we've lost. We're doing what the Romans and past Muslim, as we find these archaeological things and we go, wow, this technology never should have existed. But I don't think we could go back and build America the way we did from the 20s to the 50s because of red tape, because of unions, because of whatever. It would be impossible to build the Brooklyn Bridge right now. It would be impossible to build the intercontinental highways that we have right now because the price would be when President Obama did the shovel ready. And then as soon as it passed, he said, well, they're not actually shovel ready. There's no such thing as shovel ready. We're just calling it that. I can't imagine us being able to not only technologically and in terms of engineering be able to redo the highways or build the highways, but the environmentalist impact and overreaction. You look at the high-speed rail in California from Los Angeles to San Francisco, $25 billion. They've spent $9 billion and laid exactly 0 feet of track.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the number one, as you just said, the number one thing in California is water. A major desalination plant costs between $600 and $800 million. For $25 billion, you could have easily built 20 of those, including all the pipeline you would ever possibly need. And oh no, it leaked, and now we have some green grass over here where we shouldn't have. But instead, we spend it on things that just make absolutely no sense, like high rail. And when other countries say, well, high rail works great. Yeah, in Japan, because Japan is the size of only California and a strip of California, not all of the United States. So I think it's also a loss of technology as a whole and wherewithal and just common sense. We just can't get things done anymore in America.
Well, Senator Tim Scott, who's I think dropped out now of the presidential race, has a good line.
Oh, I didn't see it.
He says, China builds and America borrows. And that's kind of where we are right now. The last 50 years, The legal mechanisms you can use to prevent things from being built have gotten stronger and stronger. And the number of people who have a self-interest in preventing new construction has gotten stronger and stronger, especially I'm a baby boomer, the whole baby boom generation. Everybody who owns a house wants to prevent construction of new houses because that makes their own possessions more valuable. The National Environmental Policy Act, passed in 1972 and signed by Richard Nixon, the act that created the environmental impact statement, had one and only one purpose. It was to prevent construction. And at that time, the conventional wisdom was that the big business is too powerful. They're running roughshod over the landscape. They're wiping out parts of big cities to lay highways and raising forests. And there was some truth to that. So the National Environmental Policy Act is passed to prevent construction, or at least slow it down, to make it glacially slow. Well, now it's 50 years later. The conditions that were in existence when the NEPA was passed, those conditions don't exist anymore. Now most big corporations are, if anything, too environmentally cautious. We need new housing. A lot of the country is short of housing. Young people, especially young generations, they can't afford to purchase housing. They can't afford the rents because we've artificially constrained the supply. We need more green energy production. We're just talking about it. It's not a panacea, but we do need it. We need to build wind and solar. We need to build natural gas power plants, and we need to build nuclear reactors. And the language and the legal artillery involved in the National Environmental Policy Act can prevent practically anything from being built. One of the first things that Joe Biden did when he got into the Oval Office, and it kind of made me put my head in my hands, was he signed an executive order strengthening the National Environmental Policy Act. And the effect of that order is to make it close to impossible to build anything. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, right outside DC. Montgomery County's been working for 20 years on an above-ground trolley that's called around here the Purple Line. It's a nice, fanciful name. It's now it's 15, 16 years too late, and cost overruns. The cost is 6 times in adjusted dollars the original estimate. That line is now costing $500 million per mile for above ground construction. This is not a subway. This is above ground trolley, above ground construction on land that government already owns. The most similar project in the last 10 years, the East London Rail Line extension happening in London, England, cost about $80 million per mile. And don't blame the unions, because the British project was a union project. But they don't have our laws that are designed to make it almost impossible to build.
Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell also talks about the some of the tax breaks in open land and golf courses and some of those things where it benefits the very few. I mean, I love golf, but at the same time, you have this major park in Los Angeles, or here I'm in Augusta, and do you think I can get onto the Masters, the Augusta plane? No, I can't even walk around. And I've got a friend who works security there, and I still can't even get on in the gate just to even walk around if I wanted to. So yeah, I look at some of the things that we do. It's crazy in terms of red tape, and in this country, I just, like you said, why we do it. But when I say I don't get it, I think I get it, but it's stupid.
Right. I gotta correct myself. The East London Rail extension, 80 million pounds, not dollars. So you convert it into dollars, you get about $100 million.
About $100
Still
million.
much cheaper than what we're doing.
Absolutely. All right. So we are heading into the final stretch of this amazing interview. And, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Tuesday morning quarterback. So it started back in 2002. Just kind of, if you don't mind, just kind of give us a how did it come about, and then talk about kind of the evolution. I know it bounced around a couple of platforms.
It did bounce, yeah.
And then you took a break for a little bit toward the end, but now it's back and better than ever. So just kind of give us the overall about how it came about, the evolution of TMQ.
Well, Tuesday Morning Quarterback started on Slate magazine, which 20 years ago was a lot more influential than it is today. At that time, it was owned by Microsoft, and Slate was sort of the thing that was happening in writing on the web. So it was, excuse me, there for a couple of years, and then went to ESPN, It then went briefly to the NFL.com website, the league's own website, went back to ESPN, then went to the New York Times, then went to the old Weekly Standard, which went out of business right out from under me. And at that point, there were not one, not two, not three, but 4 books I wanted to write. And I just said to myself, I'm getting older, not younger. If I'm going to finish these books, I got to go all out on these 4 books. So 2 of them have been published. The other 2 are finished. They're awaiting publication next year. And at that point, once I had achieved this goal that I set for myself of writing 4 more books, I'm up to a total of 15 now. I said, well, I might as well bring back TMQ. And meanwhile, this new platform called Substack was starting to take off. And I found myself reading things on Substack. And I found myself more interested in what was on Substack than what was in the New York Times. And I said, well, I can't be the only person who feels this way. So I created a Substack. It's called All Predictions Wrong. And I'll promote myself by saying all you got to do is Google. My last name is Easterbrook, Easterbrook. Google Easterbrook, All Predictions Wrong, and you'll go to it. And it's a mixed bag of, on Tuesdays, it's Tuesday Morning Quarterback, mostly about football, sometimes about other sports, but football is the sport that I like the best. And it's the most popular sport, of course, obviously. And then on Fridays, it's about some public policy issue. I recently, for example, did, should donations to university endowments be tax deductible? So I do policy issues like that. And I write a fair amount about faith in the Friday issue. I'm a Christian agnostic, which is a real thing. I attend church, and my pastor constantly reminds me I don't attend as often as I should, but I do attend church. I'm a big Bible reader. I'm also an agnostic, and I think there are more religious agnostics than are commonly appreciated. So, and not Christian agnostics, Jewish, Muslim agnostics. So I'm starting to write about that there too. And it's the Friday edition is a real blend of stuff. The Tuesday edition is Tuesday Morning Quarterback.
Absolutely. And then before we get out of here, you have a project that's already completed, which is the Blue Age, how the new U.S. Navy created global prosperity.
Yes.
And then you also have a project that's dropping in 2024. So before we say our goodbyes, could you touch on a couple of those projects, or those 2 projects in particular?
The one that's coming, the one that's out now called the Blue Age, yes, is about the role of the United States Navy in the increase in free trade and making the oceans safe. It's been 75 years since there's been a major battle at sea. You got to go all the way back to the Phoenicians to find a period of 75 years without bloodshed at sea. The U.S. Navy has made the ocean safe. That's led to global trade. That's improved our living standards, certainly. It's led to a big reduction in poverty in Asia, which is the #1 unreported story in the world, Asian poverty going down. It would never could have happened without the United States Navy. So it gives the Navy a lot of credit for that. The next one out is called Abide for Me. It's a literary novel. I'm a kind of a mixed bag in that I do sports writing, public policy, and literary novels. I've published 3. Abide for Me will be my 4th literary novel. In my experience, you kind of have to read novels to appreciate them. But I will tell you briefly, I start with the biblical book of Hosea, which is an Old Testament book that I think is the most important overlooked book in the Bible. And in novelistic form, I tell the story that's presented in Hosea. And then I come forward to the present day, and you see the same story playing out in the present day in Chicago. And then to end the book, I go back to the far past and show you the resolution of the book of Hosea in the past, and suggest that that's what's coming next for us. So it's done as a novel, and I'm trying to make the book of Hosea, which is a hard book to read, accessible. I think it's an important part of understanding Christianity. So,
absolutely. All right. So one last thing. So you and Chaplain O'Neal have a very unique connection.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And we found that out in our initial discussions through email. If you guys don't mind kind of going over that real quick for our readers, I think our viewers and our listeners will find that really interesting.
My great, I think I put enough greats in there. My uncle, was a man named Edmund Easterbrook, who was chaplain of the Army about a century ago. And so I have a distant descent from an Army chaplain.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. So I'm gonna, when I go back up to the Chaplain Schoolhouse, there's a museum up there. We have the Chaplain Museum in Columbia, South Carolina, on
Okay.
Fort Jackson. So I'm gonna look into that a little bit.
There's
Yeah,
a
one
book
of the
about him.
Mhm.
There's a book about him, and not many copies were published, but there's a book about him called "The Soldier and the Cross."
Okay.
And if you can find that book, university libraries certainly would have it. It's about his life and he had a mixed relationship with, I don't know how you feel about it, with being a chaplain for an organization whose job is to kill people. Should I do this? And that book is a lot about how he struggled with that question.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting position to be in. I'm currently in AIT land, which is Advanced Individual Training. So after soldiers go through basic training for 12 weeks, then they go
Mhm.
to their advanced individual training. And during basic training, you're go, go, go. So you don't really have a lot of time to sit and think. Well, now you get to advanced individual training, and where I'm at, it's 4 to 8 months, and they just sit in a classroom. They
Right.
don't have their phone. They don't have interpersonal skills to be able to communicate with each other because this generation's all grown up on their phones. And now the struggle of being, it's high school on steroids. And so for me, I look at it in terms of, I'm there to, yes, the mission. I heard one that was pretty funny. A special forces colonel came into our class and he said, the United States is getting laughed at by China because we're worried about people's feelings and they're worried about killing Americans. And so as a chaplain, my job is to make sure I don't care about mission. I don't care if we go out and make the mission happen, but I do care about the soldiers being able to go do the mission. And when
Right.
you said agnostic, I think that's perfectly right. I don't bring up religion with my soldiers unless they do, because
Okay.
70%, I think it's about 70% of our soldiers are agnostic or atheist to begin with. And if the first thing you do with a soldier that's coming in and struggling, saying, Chaplain, I'm having a hard day, I don't know what to do, I'm struggling, you say, well, what's your relationship with Jesus like? They're
Right.
just going to shut down and go, why am I going to talk to this guy? That's not what I want to. I don't want to talk to him about
Yeah.
God
Yeah.
and
I
faith and all that.
understand.
Now, if it comes around to that, great. But and the other joke is, if you do get into battle as a chaplain, at the very least, you can always throw the Bible at people. So sometimes it'll stop some stuff.
I think that's
But
a
I love
great
it.
place.
I love doing this job though. To me, it's the best job in the Army because I just talk to soldiers. So
Indeed, Mr. Easterbrook, we have maxed out our 1 hour time limit. Thank you so very much. This has been exceptional. I really enjoyed it. And Chappie, if you don't mind, sir, parting words before we turn it over to Mr. Easterbrook and throw our deuces for the day.
hey, if Gregg's not, and I keep saying Gregg, and KJ's more polite than I am. If you don't go on and subscribe to his Substack, you're missing out. I've been, like I said, I've been following Gregg for almost probably that full 20 years. And one thing I really appreciate, the handful of times I've reached out and tweeted to him directly, he's always responded. Now, I don't just randomly tweet at people, but he's always responded. To me, that's the mark of someone who cares about not only what he's doing, but cares about the people that he's trying to influence through reading and through what he's writing. So big thanks, not just for being on this, but for just what you've done over the last 20 years. And I hope it keeps going for 20 more years, if that's what you want to do.
Okay. Well, I hope you're right.
Absolutely. Mr. Easterbrook, you have the final word before we toss our deuces.
Final word. Years of writing about this condition of the world has convinced me that you can either be an optimist or a pessimist. And being an optimist does not mean being a Pollyanna. Optimists know that there are lots of problems. Being an optimist means that you believe that problems can be solved. Being a pessimist means you believe we're going to be overwhelmed and we're going to fail. Your life results will be better if you're an optimist. That's one of the real bottom line things that I'm completely certain of. In our society, our social results would be better if optimism became respectable again. All this pessimistic nonsense that we get from politicians and from the mainstream media, it's holding us back. Our society would get much better results. Now, we wouldn't always get our way, we wouldn't always fix every problem, but if we were optimistic again, America would turn into the correct direction. That's my parting thought.
Amen.
Better. All right, guys. It's KJ Bradley. On behalf of myself, Chappie, Mr. Easterbrook, again, thank you so very much for hanging out.
Glad to be here, guys. Thank you.
We'll see you guys next time. Those
Okay.
are the deuces. Like I said, man, we don't save the world. We just try to give practical solutions, man. You guys have a great one. Until next time.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.